Hi, I'm Melissa Bell, and welcome to the Business Roundup, where we catch up with the movers and shakers in the business world. Today, joining me is George Ellis. He's an American physician and a urologist surgeon. He's also a writer and now filmmaker who's making some big news in the indie film area. So, as we get started, I wanted to say thank you for joining us today, but also I like to have people, when they join, just kind of give us a little bit about, you've got a long background. So how you kind of got started and how, that ended you to where you are today.
Well, thank you, Melissa, for having me on your show. I'm sure it's going to be a great show, and you're right. I have done a lot of things in the past. I think that's more of a testament of how old I am, more than anything else. Going way back to when I was in medical school, I had an opportunity to be in two films as an extra, and that sort of like stimulated me to start looking at film work. But then, of course, I went through medical school. I did my residency training in Syracuse, New York, and then I came to Florida and went into practice. And so the amount of film work that I did in practice was mostly about hospitals that they want to come in the operating room and film a new procedure. Then they want to interview you afterwards. And sometimes I did a lot of public health work. And so they want you to talk about something that pertains to a current topic. So I was always in front of the camera, and then at a certain point I said, well, that's somebody else's show. I would like at some point for it to be my own show and be able to run a production company. But I spent at least 35 years in practice, and at the time I was very busy. I want to say, last 5 years of practice, I was doing a lot of trauma work, emergencies. And for myself as a urologist, we see gunshot wounds and car accidents and things like that. Those things do not spare the kidneys and the bladder, which is what I work on. And it wasn't unusual to have a patient come in from, say, a car accident and requiring two, three, four, five surgeons to work on them for different parts of the body. And so the priority was always who is the first one that needs to handle the patient. If it's a head injury, if it's a chest injury, that has a lot of priority. So I was usually the third or fourth doctor coming in to fix the bladder or help out with the kidney or something like that. And I also did a lot of traveling at the end of my full-time practice. And I was going to places like Wisconsin and North Dakota, upstate New York, where other urologists, they wanted to take a week off or a weekend off, and there was nobody to cover. So I would fly up there and basically be on call for them while they were away. And then when they came back, I handed the patients over to them. But during that time, I want to say the last 25 years, I was doing volunteer work. And I always felt that the community had a need, especially in my community, which is Orlando, part of Orange County, Florida. And I always felt like there was a need, and there was a pressing need at a certain point where some of the emergency rooms, some of the hospitals were closing. So a lot of the uninsured patients were getting routed to two main hospitals. And so they saw an overload of patients. So I worked with the county government, and we created a system of what we call primary care access network. So that's all different agencies that were seeing uninsured. And we created a cohesive network of people that wanted to take care of the uninsured. And during that time, I volunteered my services as a urologist. And so I sort of had a medical part of that and then an administrative part. So I always said to myself while I was doing that, well, if I ever retire, I could always do this, volunteer, because it's a direct patient care. There's no insurance companies involved. There's no approval process involved, and I could just see the patients and take care of them. And they were always very grateful to have the opportunity to see a specialist. So that's what I still do now from medical side. And so it's been very fulfilling for me to be able to help out with that effort.
And that's amazing. Like, have you seen, I know like probably 5 or 6 years back, they were trying to do a lot of things to help, you know, make sure there weren't as many uninsured, people. But do you feel like during your time that you were kind of working, especially in the Orlando area, that those numbers have grown, or they stayed the same, or growing as time goes by?
Well, the numbers were starting to diminish because there were systems set up, through the federal government of having the opportunity for patients to get access to a type of insurance coverage. One of the things that we didn't know ahead of time was that those products were, those insurance products were similar to other insurance products, which means there were deductibles, there were co-pays, and patients who'd signed up with this never had insurance before. They didn't know they had this. So they'd come to the office, and I worked for the hospital at that time. So they did the sort of the front office billing part. And, they said, well, we need $200 for your deductible or your copay. And they didn't have that kind of money. And a lot of times they had to leave because thinking they had insurance, they didn't know about the deductible and the copay part. But regardless, the numbers of people that we were seeing as uninsured did diminish. Now, lately, it seems to be going up again. I think in Orlando, that's part of the growth of the population, and there's an element of employment called the working poor. So these are folks that have a job, but they may do housekeeping in a hotel or something like that. It may not be a full-time job. It may not offer benefits. So we do see some of those patients as well.
And you brought up a good point. It seems like, I mean, when you do the volunteer work, what was your favorite part of working, as a physician, during your time? Was it the patient interaction and being with the patients?
Well, I think there's the two main things were listening to the stories, and I think I'm a natural storyteller, and I think that's why I ended up going into film work, which we'll get to in a minute. But listening to the stories as to how do people end up with no insurance? People who had a job, they had insurance, they had everything. How did they end up where they were? Or how did they end up being homeless? I've always heard the term, some people are a paycheck away from being homeless. And to a certain degree, I think that does happen to some people. So that's one part of it is listening to the stories. But the other part is the gratitude that people have because they know that myself and a lot of my colleagues are there as volunteers, meaning that, we don't have to do that and we don't get paid for it. And so they recognize that somebody's making an effort to help out not only them but other people who really need the help.
And now I know you were talking about your early work in like filmmaking and that type of thing. And that was more like medical procedures and that type of thing. So how did that kind of slowly get to where you are now, where it's like full documentaries?
Well, that's a good question. It's kind of a funny story. I was in Colorado. I was hiking in this location called Lair of the Bear. It's like about 7,000 feet in altitude. And I was thinking, you go up there, you think, you get nice air. I was with my son who lives out there and his girlfriend. And I said, you know what? I want to do something that I can, sink my teeth into. And not just, go to the beach and hang out on the beach and things like that. So I said, I want to do film work. And one of the things that made me think of that was it's a lot easier to do film work today than it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you needed special equipment, you needed a big staff, you needed a lot of resources. And today, there are actually some films that have been made on a smartphone. And you do the editing or you get someone to do the editing. So when I came home from that trip, I set out to find a cinematographer because that's like the key point in getting the film work done, because it certainly wasn't going to be me. So I found someone. Her name is Katie Haley. Katie Kamala Haley, and she became like a mentor for me. First, we did some videos, sort of a little promotional things, and then she said, we need to do like some films and submit them to festivals. So we started doing that. We made a couple of films and we submitted them to film festivals. And, we started winning awards just from the first two films. And I said, boy, this is pretty cool. And part of it was we worked well together and we had the opportunity to talk about things and all that. And we had a good working relationship, and we still talk, and we wrote a book, and she wrote a book on her own also. And so that's when everything started. I started doing podcasts. I started going to other film festivals. And it seemed like the first film festival I went to, I sat in a room of other people who either were making films or who wanted to make films. And the common denominator for people who couldn't get to making their film was having enough funding of making the movie. And I that's when I said to myself, well, I don't really have that issue. I can start out and see what happens. If it works, great. If it doesn't, I'll do something else. But everything kind of took off after that.
That's amazing. I know what you're talking about because when I started, I was also like, I did acting and stuff like that. But when I started in the news industry, it was beta tapes. You had to go out with your cameraman, you come back, you have to get on the Avid machine. It's like a huge, machine and do your editing process. So it's come a
Right.
long way. Yeah, at this point. What type of documentaries do you enjoy? Like, what are the ones that you really like? You can talk about that were kind are really interesting.
Well, the first one that we did, that's where this T-shirt came. So the name of my organization is Coronado Beach Productions. And I got the name from New Smyrna Beach, which is on the east coast of Florida, south of Daytona. It used to be called Coronado Beach. And because I hang out at that beach a lot, I decided to name it Coronado Beach Productions. And so the documentary that we did was actually at New Smyrna Beach. So it's kind of a coincidence. And so we did the documentary on surfing there. And let me show you something for a minute.
Okay. I remember those dawn patrol used to be you go there at like 5 in the morning and wait for the
That's exactly right. So this poster is actually the poster of the movie,
oh my
and
goodness.
and you can tell I just switched my T-shirt around. I had a bunch of T-shirts made for the movie, and the cast and the crew, they wore these T-shirts while we were filming, and so the whole movie is about 16 minutes. I've won, 3 or 4 awards already with it. And it's mostly about surfers. We initially were going to do sort of the afterlife of surfers, what happens at the end of the day. And that's where the term après surf comes. So that's French for after surf. But then we kind of got deeper and we said, what if we set it up and we talk about why surfers they keep surfing, what keeps bringing them back to surfing, and why do they do it, day after day, and then they kind of get hooked on it, and for years they're surfing. And so I realized that it's kind of like running. You get that endorphin dopamine rush, and the neurotransmitters are really flickering. They all told us the same story. We probably interviewed, 20 surfers and got 6 of them on camera that are part of the documentary. And they all said the same thing. They described something called the stoke. And the stoke is that feeling of being out there and feeling good and being with, some of your friends and being part of the waves, being part of nature. So all that put together is sort of what we get to at the end of the documentary is what, the surfers are really into.
Oh, that is pretty cool. Yeah, and it's true because I mean, you even see like when a storm comes or whatever, that's like the prime time. Everybody heads out there when everybody else is running away from the beach. They're heading into it to try to, and so you definitely have to have a passion to want to fight those waves. And also, I know from experience because I've been on a surfboard and a shark like brushed my leg, and that was the last time
Yeah.
that really went in, deep and was out there like really like I was enough. I'm like, no, it's too close for comfort. But you have sharks out there too. So
Well, New Smyrna Beach is the shark capital of the world. Several years we had the most number of shark bites. They were at New Smyrna Beach. And so what's interesting is that I've submitted this movie now to a local film festival here in Orlando. It's called Jollywood, a Jollywood Film Festival, like Hollywood, but with a J.
Okay.
and it's their second year. It's this festival, and I submitted it because it is local, and it's easy for me to go to it. So I found out a few days ago it got accepted, so I'll be part of the competition with this documentary. But the other thing that was interesting was with my cinematographer, who's a female. We were walking on the beach after pretty much finishing the movie, and we had five guys that were on tape. And she said to me, "You know what? We need a female surfer." So I said, "Okay." So, we were walking on the beach, and I see this girl dressed in like a very skimpy, pink bikini. And so she was with a guy, and you know how it is when you walk up to somebody on the beach, it's not always, love at first sight. It's kind of like, what's this about? This is creepy. So we walked up to her, we told her we were doing a surf movie, and it turns out she was at a graduate student at UCLA, and she did competitive beach volleyball. So not only was she very athletic, but she was also wanting a lot of attention. And, she was on it for us. She said, "I want to be in a movie. Of course I do." Plus her major was marketing. So, how else can she market herself? So
Right.
she ended up being in the movie. And what's funny is that this figure of this surfer kind of looks like her. So everybody thought this was her, but the reality was I had these t-shirts made before I met her.
That's funny. It was like a meant to be situation.
I know, I know. And I've kept in touch with her also. She lives in South Florida now. And I told her about, the festival that we're in and the awards we've already won. So we did this documentary like 2 years ago. So I've gotten a lot of mileage out of this film itself.
That's amazing. And do you have any other ones in the works or ideas that you have planned?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of films. Or what I've kind of progressed to is being more of the producer of a lot of films, funding. So you could imagine that people who are looking to fund their film, when they find out somebody is actually into making films in exchange for producing them, that's a good match. And so a lot of people have approached me. They've sent me scripts. I don't accept all of them, but there's some of them that I do want to do. We just finished a film challenge last weekend. One of our films won Best Cinematography. It was an interesting film. Some of the other things that I've worked on, like this one here, the 12 Mile, that's a horror movie that we did, gosh, last year. There's been some delays in editing that one. One of the projects that I have coming up is called Mortal Sin, and it's mostly a female crew, and it has to do with a couple who get sort of kidnapped by a strange figure. So the whole story is a little bit elusive, but it has to do with women being held against their will and things that could happen. And so the women that I know, I've worked with them on other films before. They're really interested in projecting this film. We haven't started filming yet. We'll start like in a month or so, and it's going to be entered in a challenge, a film challenge. I think it's in January in Tampa. Yeah, yeah. So this film called Mortal Sin is going to a film challenge in Tampa in January. So we've got some time to get the film done and edited. We should be ready by then.
Well, that'll be awesome. Very cool kind of concept. It reminds me
Yeah,
of there was one called Boxing Helene. I don't know if you ever remember that movie. It was a very
I heard of it. I heard of it.
it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit different, but he has her captive and like she can't get away. It's like kind of like that type of and it's just like this very like weird like thing that happens between them. It's like kind of like the dynamics and stuff. So it's yeah.
Yeah, the thing I always find interesting, first of all, when I see a film of that type, you can't help but feel kind of it's almost like you're captured yourself. It's like you have this strange feeling. But then the other thing that happens sometimes is that Stockholm syndrome. Have you heard of that?
Yep. True.
And I can see that, for example, I mean, I don't know all specifics about kidnapping, but I do know that sometimes it's for ransom or trying to hold somebody so that they can get something in exchange. So if you're kidnapping somebody and if you know, kill them, well, you don't have a bargaining chip anymore. So I could imagine in a world where, there's two people and one of them is being held captive, all of a sudden you kind of develop sort of a bizarre, strange relationship with your captor. And so I've always thought that was an interesting sort of psychological perspective. Maybe I should do a documentary on that.
That's true. That is true. And I know
Yeah.
you've got one other thing. So you mentioned the podcast. So you have a podcast show. What is that? What is that about? What kind of guests do you have on?
So it's on Channel 12 TV network, broadcasts out of Las Vegas. And the principal, who's the producer, is Randy Stewart, and his nickname is Rockin' Randy. He used to be a wrestler, and he was also in radio. And so he started this TV network, and he's got a lot of different shows on it. Like he's got some old movies, he's got some old cartoons. A big segment of it is about things like Bigfoot and Dogman, and sort of those elusive type characters that we hear about and we've seen some footage of, but we don't really know as much about it. So his station does a lot of that also. But so what we do, so I have it on there with my son, and one of the reasons why I signed up for that is because my son and I we wrote this book. It's called A Surgical Approach to Meat Cutting, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the show, we have guests on there, and we do it either like this, remote, or we do it like in studio with the person, and whatever the person's expertise is. Like film people, they'll talk about movies that they've done recently. We had a sommelier who came on board. He's a level 2, and he's going for his level 3 sommelier. And we drank some wine, tasted some stuff, and listened to characteristics of all that. And so it becomes sort of an interesting conversation about whatever we're talking about, film or wine or, some kind of activity. And so we usually run about an hour, and, the shows are unedited. So whatever comes out, like the other day, we had some meat specialists out of Seattle, and we had been on their show back in September. They're called the Meat Dudes. And so we said, well, we're going to have them on our show in exchange. So they were, and, they're butchers or meat specialists, like they like to call themselves, but they don't mince words with F bombs and things like that. And it all went into the into
My goodness, all unfiltered.
yeah, exactly.
But that's the best kind sometimes. It's just like what you would say like to a person in a conversation, is sometimes the funniest things when you're not watching every word and, trying to make it exact.
Right.
And now what are some of the ways that people can find you and learn more about the documentaries, just the work you do? What would be the best place to look for that?
So we have a website. It's Coronado Beach Productions. So, the other side of this shirt, when we first started programming, coronadobeachproductions.com. And then you'll find some movie clips. You won't find full movies. Well, I think one of our movies is a 5-minute independent short that the whole thing is on it because it's on YouTube. You'll be able to order this book on there. You can look at, the progress. I've been in a lot of publications lately, so people can click on those and see what we've said. We've talked about a lot of different topics. And I also have a YouTube channel, also have a Facebook and Instagram. So we're on all of those, either under my name, George Ellis, or Coronado Beach Productions, one or the other.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today. And I definitely want to, and also for the podcast, how would they find that?
So that's going to be on Channel 12 TV network. Now, that is a subscription-based channel. So it's $9.99 a month. Gives you full access to all the programming. It's a good channel. It's fun. There's a lot of different interesting topics and different shows that people may not realize that they're interested in, but once they see it, it's like, oh wow, this is pretty cool.
Right. It gets like something different because I know a lot of times you don't want the same old thing that you see, day in, day out, during the week. So that'll be something, unique for people looking for some different type of audience stimulation. So, well, I appreciate you
Right,
joining
right.
us and look forward to seeing the documentary as well.
Well, thank you, Melissa. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you for joining the Business Roundup, where we always try to bring you interviews with some of the leading people in business, whether it be technology, finance, or energy. I hope you tune in. I hope you subscribe and listen, and we'll give you updates for new interviews that are coming up. Until next time, I'm Melissa Bill.